I rolled into Dr. Mason's office with cautious optimism, gripping my medical file like a lifeline. The specialist's reputation preceded him, renowned in his field, difficult to get an appointment with, but supposedly the best. My condition, a neuromuscular disorder that had progressively worsened over the years, needed a more advanced treatment plan. My previous doctor had recommended him, saying he was my best chance at slowing the progression. Dr. Mason barely looked up from his laptop when I entered, a cold, detached man in his late 50s with the arrogance of someone who had long stopped seeing patients as people. "Ms. Carter, is it?" he asked, finally glancing at me over the rim of his glasses. "Olivia," I corrected, placing my file on his desk. "I have all my previous test results here, along with a referral from—" He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "I don't take on cases like yours." I blinked. "Excuse me?" He sighed, flipping through my file as if I were wasting his time. "Degenerative conditions like yours. There's not much that can be done. I focus on patients who have a chance at significant improvement." The words hit me like a slap. He wasn't even pretending to be professional about it. "I didn't come here for a cure," I said evenly. "I came for management options. My last doctor said—" "I'm sure they meant well." He closed my file and pushed it aside. "But realistically, investing time and resources into a case like yours, it's not worth the effort." The air left the room. I stared at him, stunned. Not because I was unfamiliar with dismissal. Society was built to make disabled people feel like burdens, but because of the casual cruelty of it. The way he dismissed my entire existence in a single sentence, like I was a failed investment. I swallowed down the rage rising in my throat, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I see." He was already turning back to his computer. "I suggest you find a general practitioner to manage your symptoms. I don't handle chronic cases." I nodded, gripping the wheels of my chair. "Thank you for your time." I left without another word. Not because I accepted defeat, because I was already calculating my next move. By the time I got home, the humiliation had hardened into something else. Determination. I knew what had just happened wasn't unique. It felt too rehearsed, too routine. How many others had walked into Dr. Mason's office only to be dismissed before they even had a chance to fight for themselves? I poured a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and started digging. It didn't take long. A single bad review could be dismissed. Dozens? That was a pattern. His name surfaced in disability support forums, in patient advocacy groups, in legal complaints that went nowhere. Stories poured in. Patients denied treatment, turned away because their conditions were too complex or not worth the effort. One woman, diagnosed with MS, had written about how he refused to sign off on necessary medical equipment, delaying her treatment by months. A father recounted how his son, who had cerebral palsy, was ignored during their appointment as Mason spoke only to the caregiver, until he denied treatment outright. Then I found something worse. A formal complaint filed 2 years ago by a patient's family. Their daughter, a 28-year-old with muscular dystrophy, had seen Mason for a consultation, only to be dismissed exactly like I had been. 4 months later, she died from complications that could have been managed if she had received treatment earlier. The complaint had gone nowhere. Insufficient evidence, the board had ruled, because Mason was smart. He didn't outright say, "I refuse to treat disabled patients." No, he phrased it in legally ambiguous ways. "Not my area of expertise. Not a case I can take on. Seek another provider." Just enough to avoid liability. But patterns don't lie. I wasn't just another rejected patient. I was a witness. And now I had something those other families didn't have. The determination to build a case so airtight, so undeniable, that no board, no hospital, and no loophole could protect him. I clicked save on my growing file of evidence. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I sat across from Julia Myers, my attorney, in her sleek downtown office. She was sharp, efficient, and not easily rattled, which is exactly why I had chosen her. A specialist in medical malpractice and disability rights cases, she had taken down doctors before. She skimmed through my growing file on Dr. Mason, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is disgusting," she muttered, flipping between the online complaints, the dismissed lawsuit, and my own recorded experience. But unethical and illegal are two different things. What he's doing is absolutely wrong, but proving malpractice? That's harder. I already knew the answer, but I asked anyway. If a doctor refuses to treat someone based on their disability, isn't that discrimination? In theory, yes, Julia said, leaning back in her chair. But in practice, doctors have a lot of discretion. He never said outright that he won't treat disabled patients, he just makes excuses. Not my area of expertise, not a viable case. That's hard to prosecute. I exhaled slowly, keeping my expression neutral. So what do I need? Evidence, she said immediately. Something solid. If we can prove he systematically denies treatment to disabled patients, especially if it has caused harm, we can take this to the medical board. Best case, we revoke his license. Worst case, we destroy his reputation so completely that no hospital will touch him. I nodded, my mind already working through the possibilities. You've done good research, Julia admitted, tapping my notes. But a medical board won't act on online complaints alone. We need medical records showing patterns of denial, recorded testimonies from former patients, insider information from staff or ex-employees. I glanced down at my hands, steady despite the slow-burning anger inside me. I can get all of that. Julia's eyes met mine, assessing. You sure? This isn't just a lawsuit, it's a war. He'll fight back. I thought about every patient he had dismissed, every life he had impacted because he couldn't be bothered. I met Julia's gaze. Let him. If Mason thought he had won, he was about to realize just how wrong he was. I started small, reaching out to patients who had left negative reviews. Many were hesitant, fearful of going up against a powerful doctor. Some had given up after their complaints were ignored. But then I found Sarah Green. Her sister Emily had been one of Mason's dismissed patients. She had a neuromuscular disorder similar to mine, only unlike me, she didn't have time to find another doctor. 4 months after Mason refused to treat her, she suffered a severe respiratory event. She died in the hospital, a death that could have been prevented. Sarah was ready to fight. She had every medical record, every denial, and every email from Mason's office stating that Emily wasn't a candidate for treatment. I recorded her statement, had her sign an affidavit, and added it to my growing file. Next, I turned my attention to hospital staff. I reached out to former nurses and administrative employees, people who had worked alongside Mason. Some ignored me, but one responded. Her name was Lisa Hart, a former nurse who had quit Mason's practice 2 years ago. I knew what he was doing was wrong, she admitted over a cup of coffee. He would pre-screen patients before they even got into his office. If their case looked too difficult, he'd tell the receptionist to cancel their appointment. I took out my phone. Would you be willing to go on record? She hesitated. I don't want to lose my license. I nodded, understanding. What if you just provided documentation, internal memos, emails, anything proving he deliberately turned away patients based on their conditions? She swallowed hard. Then, finally, she slid a flash drive across the table. I kept records, Lisa said. I knew this would catch up to him one day. Bingo. I was getting closer. I had testimonies. I had documentation. Now I needed undeniable proof, and that meant catching Mason in the act. I had one last move to play. It was time to set him up. I needed something undeniable, evidence so clear and damning that no amount of excuses or legal maneuvering could save Dr. Mason. That's where Ben Caldwell came in. Ben was a seasoned investigative journalist, the kind who had spent years exposing corporate corruption and medical fraud. When I told him about Mason, he didn't hesitate. I'll get you what you need, he promised. We devised a plan, a sting operation. Ben scheduled an appointment with Mason's office for a friend, an actor we hired to pose as a disabled patient with a neurological condition similar to mine. The actor, David, would wear a hidden recording device, ask for treatment, and document Mason's reaction in real time. The goal? Catch Mason refusing treatment on record. The appointment was set for Wednesday afternoon. I waited anxiously, refreshing my phone every few minutes. Then, at 3:42 p.m., Ben sent me the file. "You're going to love this," his message read. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. Mason's voice was unmistakable, flat, dismissive, and utterly indifferent. "I just don't take cases like yours," he told David. "But I was referred to you specifically," David pushed, his voice laced with confusion. "I just need help managing my symptoms." Mason sighed impatiently. "Listen, I focus on cases with a real chance of improvement. Complex cases. People like you aren't worth the time. You'd be better off seeing a general practitioner." I clenched my fists. There it was. "Just to be clear," David said, "you're refusing to treat me because of my condition?" Mason hesitated for only a second before saying, "That's not what I'm saying. I just know when treatment isn't going to be beneficial. It's best not to waste resources." I stopped the recording. It was perfect. Mason had done exactly what I knew he would, refused treatment, downplayed his responsibility, and revealed his bias. I had everything I needed. It was time for the next step. Time to end his career. I walked into Julia's office with an ironclad case. She raised an eyebrow as I placed a thick folder on her desk, followed by a flash drive. "What's all this?" she asked. I smiled. "The reason Dr. Mason is about to lose everything." Julia went through the evidence methodically. Patient testimonies, medical records, internal memos from former staff, the undercover recording. She looked up at me, genuine admiration in her eyes. "This isn't just a complaint, Olivia. This is a full-scale takedown." I nodded. Good. We spent the next 4 hours drafting the official complaint to the state medical board. This wasn't just about me. It was about every patient he had harmed, every life he had disregarded. By the time we finished, the complaint was a 40-page document backed by irrefutable proof. The key points included Mason's repeated refusal to treat disabled patients, sworn testimonies from multiple victims, medical records proving neglect and malpractice, the undercover recording of Mason outright refusing treatment, documentation from ex-employees confirming his discriminatory practices. "This is devastating," Julia said, tapping the thick document. "There's no way the board ignores this." That evening, Julia officially filed the complaint with the State Medical Board and the Department of Health. The next morning, Dr. Mason was notified. By noon, his world started to crumble. Dr. Mason might have been able to fight a private complaint, but he had no defense against public outrage. By the time the State Medical Board acknowledged our complaint, I was already working with Ben to escalate the pressure. "This needs to go public," I told him. Ben didn't hesitate. He had connections at several major news outlets, and within hours he was feeding them the story. The headline hit the news cycle by the next morning. "Doctor refuses treatment to disabled patients, now facing investigation." The article outlined everything: the testimonies, the denial of care, the hidden discrimination Mason had been getting away with for years. It even included excerpts from our undercover recording, his voice casually dismissing disabled patients as not worth the effort. Within hours, the backlash began. On social media, people flooded Mason's hospital's official page, demanding answers. Disability advocates, patient rights groups, and even other doctors started weighing in. This is medical discrimination, period. If this is true, he should lose his license. How many people suffered because of him? By the afternoon, Mason had lawyers threatening defamation suits, but it was too late. The damage was done. Then came the local news station segment. Ben had managed to get an interview slot where he laid out the full story on air for everyone to see. They showed clips of the recording, quotes from our complaint, and even an interview with one of Mason's former patients who had suffered due to his neglect. I watched the broadcast from my laptop, taking in Mason's face as the station showed his official headshot alongside the words, "Under investigation, doctor accused of neglecting disabled patients." For the first time, I knew he was feeling what his patients had felt for years, helpless. I took a slow sip of my coffee and waited for the next domino to fall. The hospital board didn't act because they cared. They acted because they had no choice. By Monday morning, Mason's practice was in full-blown crisis mode. Patients canceled appointments, calls to the hospital's PR department flooded in, sponsors and research funders started asking questions. The hospital's executives called an emergency meeting, and I made sure they had all the information they needed to make the right decision. That morning, I mailed anonymous letters to every high-ranking hospital board member. Inside, they found a copy of the official complaint filed with the state medical board, a list of potential lawsuits from denied patients, transcripts of Mason's recorded refusals, a financial analysis of how discrimination lawsuits could affect the hospital's funding. The message was clear. Protect him and you'll go down with him. Cut him loose, and maybe you survive. By Tuesday afternoon, Mason's world imploded. A statement was released by the hospital. Dr. Mason has been placed under investigation. While we take these allegations seriously, we remain committed to ethical and equal patient care. Translation: he was being thrown under the bus. His name disappeared from the hospital's list of approved specialists within hours. By the evening, an internal memo leaked, "All existing cases under Dr. Mason's care will be reassigned pending investigation." I smiled as I read it. They were cutting him out completely. He just didn't know it yet. Dr. Mason had spent years ignoring the desperate pleas of his patients. Now, for the first time, he was the one being ignored. The State Medical Review Board officially launched their inquiry into his practices. By Friday morning, an official notice was sent out. Dr. Mason is placed on temporary suspension pending the outcome of the investigation. It was the first step toward permanent revocation, and I was about to make sure that step turned into a free-fall. The hearing was held in a sterile conference room, packed with lawyers, medical experts, and board officials. Mason sat stiffly at the end of a long table, his jaw clenched, suit perfectly pressed, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. I took my seat across from him. I wasn't nervous. He was. The board members began reading through the official complaints, detailing Mason's refusals to treat disabled patients, the undercover recording, and testimonies from former staff. Then it was my turn to testify. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply laid out the facts. I told them about my appointment, the casual dismissal, the way he pushed aside my entire existence with a sentence. I played the recording of his blatant discrimination. Then I handed over the statements from patients he had neglected. The board listened in stunned silence. Mason's lawyer tried to fight back. "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted. "Dr. Mason is a highly respected professional with decades of experience. His words have been taken out of context." I folded my arms. "Really?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of printed complaints, spanning over 5 years, hundreds of patients, all telling the same story. Mason went pale. His lawyer stopped talking. By the end of the hearing, the board members exchanged knowing glances. They didn't need more time to deliberate. Dr. Mason was finished. The suspension was bad. The financial fallout was worse. The moment the board's inquiry was made public, Mason's malpractice insurance provider dropped him. Without coverage, he couldn't legally practice medicine, even if he somehow survived the investigation. His private patients, the wealthy elite he relied on, canceled their appointments overnight. His clinic, once fully booked for months, was now an empty shell. The hospital had already started reassigning his patients to other specialists. Then came the lawsuits. Sarah Green, the sister of Emily, who had died after Mason refused her treatment, was the first to file. Then another patient, then another. The avalanche had started. By the end of the week, Mason was facing multiple lawsuits for medical negligence, legal fees, settlements, lost income. I watched from a distance as he tried to fight back, tried to control the damage, but there was no stopping it. He was watching his life collapse. Just like the patients he had abandoned. Dr. Mason had spent years cultivating a reputation, not just as a doctor, but as a respected name in elite medical circles. Now that reputation was crumbling in real time. The moment his suspension was announced, the hospital did what every self-preserving institution does when faced with scandal. They turned on him. His name was quietly removed from the hospital's website. His upcoming medical lectures were canceled. His colleagues, once eager to praise him, distanced themselves overnight. The final blow came when former staff members began speaking out. One by one, nurses, residents, and even junior doctors who had trained under him came forward. A nurse confirmed that he routinely screened patients' medical histories before appointments and canceled the ones that seemed too complicated. A junior doctor admitted that he overheard Mason calling a disabled patient a lost cause. Another physician shared an email where Mason openly dismissed a case because the patient had no real quality of life anyway. The more people spoke, the clearer the pattern became. Dr. Mason had built an entire career around avoiding the people who needed him most. The backlash reached the highest levels of the medical community. The American College of Physicians revoked his membership. His board certifications were placed under review. His name, once featured in medical journals, was now attached to a scandal. By the end of the month, Dr. Mason had no allies left. I wondered if he finally understood how it felt to be abandoned, to be dismissed, to be treated as if you didn't matter. I doubted it, because men like him never believe they're truly at fault. But that was about to change. Dr. Mason sat in front of the medical review board, his hands clasped tightly, his face lined with exhaustion. He had spent the last 3 months fighting to save himself. This hearing was his last chance. I sat across from him, calm, focused. I already knew how this would end. The board chair cleared her throat and began reading the formal decision. After careful review of the evidence, the board finds Dr. Mason guilty of gross medical negligence, willful discrimination, and failure to uphold the ethical standards of medical practice. She paused, letting the words sink in. Mason stared ahead, silent. Then came the final blow. Doctor, Mason's medical license is hereby revoked indefinitely. Effective immediately, he is barred from practicing medicine in this state. The room was silent, except for the sound of his career being buried. I expected him to argue, to rage, to demand another chance. Instead, he just sat there, shoulders slumped, staring at the table. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was gone. All that was left was a ruined man. By the time I left the building, the news had already spread. Major medical outlets picked up the story. Patients he had wronged celebrated his downfall. The final chapter of his career had been written by the very people he had dismissed. By the next week, his office was closed permanently. His hospital contract terminated, his savings being drained by lawsuits. Dr. Mason had spent years making disabled patients feel invisible. Now he was the one no one wanted to see. Dr. Mason had spent his career untouchable, a name that commanded respect, a man who believed himself above consequences. Now he was just another disgraced former doctor with nothing left. I tracked his downfall through quiet updates, news reports, legal filings, whispers from former colleagues. His appeals were denied. Every attempt to reinstate his medical license was rejected outright. The lawsuits stacked up. Former patients won settlement after settlement, forcing him to sell off his assets just to stay afloat. His bankruptcy filing was public record. Years of wealth and privilege, wiped out in an instant. The once arrogant doctor who dismissed people like me as not worth the effort was now struggling to afford his own legal fees. By the time the last lawsuit was settled, Mason had lost everything. His house, sold, his luxury car, repossessed, his career, over. Even the hospital community that once praised him refused to acknowledge him now. I heard whispers that he was living in a rented apartment outside the city, avoiding the public humiliation he once never thought possible. Good, because if he had no problem watching others suffer, he deserved to feel what it was like to lose everything himself. I hadn't thought about Mason in weeks when the letter arrived. A plain, unmarked envelope, no return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Dr. Mason. I sat at my desk staring at it for a long moment before finally opening it. The letter was exactly what I expected. I never intended to hurt anyone. I was under pressure. The system forces doctors to make tough choices. I regret how things played out. I hope you can understand. Nowhere did he say, I was wrong. Nowhere did he say, I am sorry. It was not an apology, it was an excuse, a plea for sympathy, a final grasp for dignity. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in a drawer, and never responded. He was looking for redemption, but I owed him nothing. Justice had already been served. Mason was gone, but the fight wasn't over. I had spent months exposing one doctor, but I knew the truth. He wasn't the only one. So I turned my attention to something bigger. I started working with advocacy groups, pushing for legislation to protect disabled patients from medical discrimination. I spoke at healthcare conferences, sharing my story, exposing the dangers of doctors who think they can decide who is worth treating. I helped patients file complaints, ensuring what happened to me wouldn't happen to someone else. And soon, change started happening. A new policy was passed, making it harder for doctors to refuse treatment based on case complexity. A hospital reform bill was introduced, requiring more oversight on how specialists handle disabled patients. It wasn't just about Mason anymore. It was about making sure no one else got away with what he did. And as I stood before an audience at a national healthcare summit, preparing to give a speech on patient rights, I realized something. I had won. Not just against one doctor, but against the entire system that enabled him. I took a deep breath, smiled, and began speaking. No one would ever silence me again. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even crazier.